Welcome to the Afropolitan Podcast, hosted by Eche, Emole, founder of Afropolitan. On the show, we chat with Afropolitans whose footprints form the foundation of systems dedicated to building the future of a bold and progressive Black community. In each episode, our guests share their working formulas, the hard facts about leaving familiar terrain, embracing the unknown, and staying relevant afterwards. Listen as we extract the blueprints of fearlessness, innovation, and progress.
Hey Afropolitans! In today's episode, we chat with Michael Ugwu, founder of Freeme Digital, an online music distribution network serving the African market. Michael talks about his journey running a distribution company in Nigeria and how NFTs can revolutionize the music industry. We hope you enjoyed this episode. No, I appreciate you for taking the time, man.
No props, man. No props.
How was NFT NYC?
It was sick.
Yeah?
It was sick, yeah. I think the best part about it was, since I've been in the crypto space and the NFT space, we're all kind of like, pseudonymous to an extent. Like, most people just know my CryptoPunk or my Bored Ape as my avatar. But people don't know me. So it's the same for me with other people. So it was great to meet people in real life for the first time. Actually connect with human beings. It's almost like taking the mask off. And just saying that, everyone's regular, everyone's good peoples, A lot of people in the game, a lot of young people in the game. But if you take a step back, sometimes you think that crypto just for like young kids and NFTs of young kids. Got a good range of players in the game doing interesting stuff. That's the part about it.
Yeah, it's dope. It's dope. And I think, honestly, I want our conversation today to center around what decentralization, especially in the case of NFTs or maybe possibly DAOs, represents for the music and entertainment industry, especially in Africa. And I feel like you've been an early adopter of the crypto space. Can you give the listeners why you got into crypto so early?
So funny enough, as in way before I got into the media space, I was an investment banker, and I also studied economics during my master's. So I'd always had that interest in finance, full stop. Right. A lot of people think I just came into the entertainment game as kind of like, guy where Eche, just, working with artists. But, I had a little bit of a financial background. So when I first found out about Bitcoin, I guess like everybody, I was very apprehensive as to what this was and what this meant. But I think when I actually first really started looking at it, I was just looking at all the payment challenges we were having in Africa. I've worked in the startup space. I worked in a couple of spaces across Africa. Payments was always an issue. I started to understand Bitcoin. I was like, this could work. But, it wasn't where it was today. It was very early. It was very niche. So I think around 2017, 2018, I actually started to take, Bitcoin a lot more seriously. Started buying more, started looking into it more, studying it more. Eventually I just fell down the rabbit hole, man. As they say, I bit the bullets like a Matrix. You pick your pill, right? Red or blue. Red or blue pill. I started looking at Bitcoin and crypto just from that economic perspective. Looking at where we're at in terms of, currency devaluation, inflation, trust in governments, trust in central authorities, fiat currencies, how long they exist, how long will the US dollar be the fiat currency place? At one point it was the British pound. At one point the Romans had the fiat currency of choice. And you find that throughout history, central governments tend to debase currencies to nothing. It was hard. I was getting to the point where I'm like, I'm not getting any younger. I don't want to walk uphill. So if I'm going to sweat, I need to understand how I store that value. So yeah, man. So when I really, really, really got it, I went gung ho, to be honest. I was selling land in Lagos. I just looked at it like this. My other investments make no sense. My stocks, my real estate, other things I had going on made no sense. So I started to liquidate a lot of stocks till I got to zero. I did a lot of real estate until I got to zero. And I threw it all at Bitcoin and Ethereum.
And this is around what time? This is 2017, 2018?
So the time I actually went super heavy was early 2019 when I'd been buying Bitcoin. But when I saw Bitcoin fall to like 3K, 3.5 or something, I had money on the sidelines and I just threw the whole kitchen sink at Bitcoin about 3K. I threw everything at Ethereum about $100. I knew what I was doing with Bitcoin. Like, I don't think it was luck because I tempered with my decisions. And for me to sell all my stocks, Tesla, Apple, Facebook, everything, for me to sell real estate, like everything and throw at Bitcoin, I didn't think
my Lord.
So I got fortunate, and then to be honest, that actually helped me get into the NFT space because at some point, when you look at centralization and decentralization, as I grew accustomed to more decentralized existence, I was trying to figure out how do I exist in this decentralized world? What can I buy? What can I use my crypto for? So NFTs became something interesting to consider because I started buying NFTs, I think, last year, March, right? And I was already up on some part of my portfolio. I was bringing new money as well, and I just started buying NFTs. So it was everything. I mean, the rabbit hole interested me. The whole crypto rabbit hole interested me, which is why I got into DeFi. I got into NFTs early. Started looking at DAOs pretty early. I was talking to people, asking questions, and what you find out of the crypto space is that people are very open and willing to talk. They're even excited that people don't think they're crazy, right? And people are looking for advice and counsel as to how do I get deeper into Web3? How do I understand decentralization better? So, throughout the time, my early days, I was definitely doing a lot of follow who, no road. I was finding like OGs in this, communicating, listening. That's how I got a crypto punk at some point. So I started to realize that a lot of these OGs I was talking to had these crypto punks. You should just see his cartoon characters. I didn't get it. It was, last year was a crazy year for a lot of people. And I think that I spent a large portion of last year down the crypto rabbit hole. That started in 2018, but last year was a crazy time for crypto in general.
Man, you don't understand how, like, just listening to you talk, because I've gone through this rabbit hole over the last week or two, down the Web3, DAOs, NFT, decentralization, rabbit hole. And even though I think I'd understood for a while now what Bitcoin represented, which was, I've also worked in the fintech space in Nigeria, right? So I understand how payments is broken across Africa. I travel to different African countries, and you just have to stop doing this ring around the roses just to figure out payments. And I was saying, even coming back to the whole NSAR situation, when they shut down the traditional payment system, the only thing that stayed up was Bitcoin, right? Because it was decentralized. It wasn't attached to any one government. And I think going back to your example of what it's looked like from the Romans to the Greeks to the UK to the US, is you start to see over and over, like, centralized institutions become these single points of failure, right? And in Nigeria, that's really what it's become for us, right? Like, we've had single points of failure from our government, from our CBN. And it's like, how do we opt out to then opt back in? And I think that's why decentralization is really our future, especially from an African continent perspective, because we've suffered too much from single points of failure, But no, Michael, I wanted us to backtrack a little bit to give people the context of your journey, right? Let's start from general manager for Sony Music West Africa. What was that journey like to the Freeme space?
So how I even got the gig with Sony was that basically when I was running Iroking.com, and then I constantly discussed with Sony about licensing major label catalog. Right. And so I'd spent a couple of years, building up the relationship with Sony, just understanding the economics of licensing major label catalog in Africa. So I had a relationship with Sean, who's the MD of Sony Music Africa. Anytime he's in Lagos, we'll hang out, have dinner. Anytime I'm in Joburg, we'll hang out, have dinner. So when Sony were enter the Nigerian market, or the West African market, they hit me up. This is how these things work, right? Relationships, networking is always important, right? I wasn't actually looking for a job at the time. I'd actually started Freeme already. It was growing. I was hiring. And then in the first instance, I was actually helping somebody find an MD. Some names. They came back and were like, no, like, Mike, consider this thing. Like, we have a relationship with you. Probably can get on board. After about 3-4 months, backwards and forwards, I was like, look, cool. I haven't had any major label experience. And it'll be great from a product perspective to launch this major label in the territory. So I said, cool, let me get on board. And it was supposed to be sort of like a assignment. One of my key goals was to ensure that we did a deal with MTN Music Plus at the time, right? So that deal about licensing our 5 million track catalog to MTN. No telco had any content at that time. Right? So it was the first deal of its kind in SSA outside of South Africa. It was a pretty big deal. I felt that, cool, if I can pull this off, it's great for my resume, it's great for my experience. I had a relationship with MTN already. As an aggregator, you have relationships with telcos. And obviously I have my relationships with Sony. And between London, Lagos, Joburg, and New York, we managed to pull it out the bag, but it took about 3.5 years, which is what kept me there for long. So yes, I think that journey was one of, reading on a global basis. It was also about, helping push the validation of Afrobeats forward. I was always a proponent of Afrobeats in general, and the local labels have done such a fantastic job without the help of the majors. I was never of the belief that the majors were going to be game-changing as to where things went. The majors have their place in the ecosystem, and as we see from some of the recent successes of some of our local artists, they are a link in certain territories. But in general, I think it's ecosystem of distributors, independent labels, larger international music companies, and then major labels, right? So everyone had their place. But it was an interesting time, running Sony Music. I got to work on some very interesting projects from UK to the US. I brought Jadena on tour to Nigeria, and then South Africa. I brought a bunch of very high level execs, such as Sylvia Rohn, out to Lagos. So definitely pushing forward the Afrobeats narrative and doing my part. But, I'm a small cog in a pretty large wheel. So when that came to an end, I was kind of like, look, I think I've done the thing that I wanted to do whilst with them. We had signed Wizkid, we signed Davido, we've done the MTN deal, a bunch of things we put in the pipeline. And I was pretty much ready to get back to the independent side of things and get back to Freeme. Whilst I was with Sony, I left the management team in place of Freeme. So the company was still big right? So going back to that, by 2019, it was just a case of we're at this stage and I need to turbo boost wherever we're going from here, right? So getting back on seat, pushing the Freeme space forward. So the Freeme space was like a blueprint, and we'd actually started the project early on, just before I started. Then obviously, whilst I was doing a lot of distraction running that business, so a lot of things were hanging, but I was still pushing the narrative forward behind the scenes. When I on seat, the goal is two things. Push forward the fact that, look, we need to actually have buzzing hive of creative activity, which I felt the Freeme space was, and at the same time, it was about getting back to building a label services business. Drive forward some of our partners. We have multiple clients across the artist space, across the brand space. I want to get back on the other side of the table. Working with a corporation is cool, but it comes with its limitation. And there's something exciting about, being a child of your own destiny.
What would you say are some of the challenges of being a founder in the African ecosystem?
I mean, aside from regulations and government lack of input, I think for me on a day-to-day, it's human capital. I think it's extremely hard to run a successful business without adequate human capital. And I think that, one of the biggest issues we've had over the years in the media space is that some of the most talented human capital doesn't come into our space, right? They go to banks, they go to telcos, they go to tech companies, they go to advertising agents, they go to almost everywhere except music companies.
Music, yeah.
I think a few companies have done a lot to try and change that narrative. You know, Mavens have done a pretty good job of attracting great talent. I think Chocolate City have done a good job of attracting great talent. I think Aristocrat Records have done a good job at attracting talent. But I mean, you can literally count on one hand how many music companies have been able to attract some of the best talent in the business. And I'm not just people who are interested in music, because if you go to Sony, you'll see the best lawyers.
Over there too.
Right? Not because they love music, but because it's a great company, right? It's a great sector to be in. So I think that would probably be one of the biggest challenges over the years. But it's been changing. And I definitely have to give a shout out to guys like Godwin Tom, who are doing a good job of trying to push the education, you know, the music exec education. I think the growing narrative, you know, shout out to him on what he's doing at Music Business Africa. You know, I've sent some of my staff that course, right, to kind of like improve their skills. So that's one. If you give me all day, I can give you like 10. But
definitely
20. But human capital is one of the hardest.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine. So then let's circle back to the pandemic. What would you say was the biggest impact of the pandemic for you, for the business? What were some of the operational challenges during that period?
So, you know, like every business was forced into survival mode, right? I was a bit heavy on payroll that time. Pre-pandemic, I had about 50 people on payroll. Today, we've whittled that number down to about 23 on payroll, right? So it was adjusting to the new paradigm of remote working, of reduced business capacity because of the pandemic, to increased opportunities in some places because of the pandemic. So streaming went kind of like off the charts during the pandemic. Video streaming, the audio streaming, everybody was at home listening to Spotify, YouTube. So there were some benefits, right? But then talking about ad supported, you know, as in like definitely that there was some pullbacks there because more people were watching, but ads were paying less. Because the first thing companies during a tough time is pull back the ad budget.
Pull back,
right? A lot of people were watching. So it kind of like balanced itself out. I think net it was positive as opposed to negative, right? So, you know, adjusting to that new normal, I think adjusting to culture around remote working. The culture we have in Nigeria around, you know, the workplace, I'm sure you know, like I said, being in the office, pretending to do work. I think the pandemic exposed a lot of stuff.
A lot,
And then into that remote working culture, it actually showed who was really inputting into the business. Right? So that was good for us in a way because I got to see the guys who were literally doing nothing. During the pandemic, there was no input. You measure these inputs, right? So that was definitely something that changed. I think we had to learn to use some remote working tools. You know, we had to get better at like Slack and Trello, you know, get better at how do we monitor what people are doing? How do we ensure projects are being completed? You know, how do we assign work? How do we, you know, group teams? Working through that and then still trying to cater to clients and getting on board new clients, it wasn't easy. But I think we came out of it a stronger business. We came out of it understanding where our strengths were and understanding these are the core parts of our business. And so we managed to trim, right? So we trimmed fat, like probably a lot of people. I think, honestly speaking, it was probably good for us to go through such a tough time. But like I said, fortunate because our business was digital already. We didn't have to transition to digital. You understand? The name of the parent company is Freeme Digital, right? So almost everything we did was digital already, aside the stores. Everything else was digital. So it was good. It was challenging, but it was good.
Definitely. So I think everyone gets to deal with failures at some point. What was your first encounter with failure as an entrepreneur?
Oh, my days. Bro, I've had loads, man. As an entrepreneur, my wife keeps a list of all the businesses that I failed at. The list is pretty long. The list is pretty long. So, you know, I mean, I've encountered failure, you know, whilst trying to be an entrepreneur in the UK. I've encountered failure while trying to be an entrepreneur in Nigeria.
Yeah.
And I think, the biggest lesson for me was always get up, get back on the saddle, right? Give it a second stop or pivot, but just think.
Yeah.
Don't do anything blindly, right? As in, seek counsel. Nothing, there's hardly anything new under the sun, right? There's usually a fix or a solution to something. So I think, failure is just part and parcel of being an entrepreneur. I mean, even running Freeme, I failed at several things. We've had initiatives that failed. Like there was we once tried to do a physical magazine, right? Figured we got into the whole weed of it. And I realized, actually physical print business is very hard. Physical print magazine is very hard. Firstly, where do you print? You don't have the greatest quality prints in Lagos. Then where do you distribute? Right? Then even once you've gone through all of that, where like where's the teeming population that's going to be buying your publication, going to be buying your magazine, right? So that was definitely a part of the business that we figured, we just weren't good enough at, and pivoted that to something more digital, more like a blog. And I had high hopes for something like that. So along the way, we definitely had, several failures. I think early on, when we were first trying to build out the back-end analytics system for Freeme Digital reporting, we had outsourced to a company in the UK. They built a substandard product, right? So then I decided, let me bring engineering in-house. So we took this whole period of a year or two. We brought engineering in-house, hired a team, a CTO, about 10 tech guys, working behind the scenes. It was difficult, right? It's hard to manage an engineering team unless, you have that core, your core technology business. We weren't necessarily a core technology business. IP industry. Our business is IP. Right? So we tried that. Spend a lot of money paying salaries for a couple of years because these tech guys don't come cheap. These developers,
they do not
come cheap.
They do not.
Figured that wasn't just working. Shut the whole thing down and fully outsourced all of our reporting and analytics to a specialist company based out of Israel. So there's lots of things that I've tried. I had initiatives on. It's failed, and I'm like, cool, because it's failed. That's final. Right? And I've always I've always been able to figure out either one of three things: try again, right? Pivot, or just shut it down. Like it's dead, cancel it. That's not gonna work.
When it comes time to shut down stuff, is there some emotional attachment to it? Or have you learned to sort of detach yourself because it's no longer personal?
It's hard, man. I won't lie. I can't say I'm a super emotional guy, but any business you start or any initiative you start is your baby. You don't just, it's not your baby's behaving badly and you shut him outside the house, right? It's not easy. I think that, you have some entrepreneurs who are like cold-blooded and, there's some things I could be cold-blooded at, but something like, initiatives, I can sometimes dilly-dally, to be honest. I always want to give and try. I'm a believer in, second chances. So I try to give something a try. But I think once it's clear to me, it's time for it to go. At that point, and usually it's costing me more money than it should be, right? And I'm like, all right, cool. I'm not losing money, hand over fist on this anymore.
Definitely.
Shut it down. So
it's time to move. At your time at Iroking, right, what would you say were some of the lessons you learned in that period? Because that was such an early period, especially in the ecosystem, right? What would you say were some of the lessons?
I mean, that was a very interesting period. I mean, from a commercial perspective, it was so early. It became pretty clear to me that almost everything you do, think mobile in Africa. That was definitely a lesson that came out of that. Like mobile is everything. And then even at that, you can even get razor sharp and just focus on Android. Because I think early on when we built apps for Iroking, eventually when we started to focus on mobile, we built apps across the board: Windows, iOS, BlackBerry, Nokia, Symbian, Android, and we built like 6 apps. Every time, everything, right? But a bag of cat building apps. That was definitely a big lesson early on. I think understanding that this whole story around 200 million Nigerian, as part of a pitch or a narrative is rubbish, right? 200 million Nigerians aren't buying your product, my brother.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I think I saw that the market is probably like 5 million people, 5 million people.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's being generous. And then again, it depends on what you're selling. The more luxury your item, I mean, you're cutting that number down to like 100,000 people, 50,000, maybe even less.
Yeah.
Like Suchi is looking for the 1%. You know, it's hard to buy land in Banana Island, right? But I think something like with music, even though it's it's for the mass market, the fact of the matter, it's a luxury item. Not everybody has that $10 or $5 to spend on a monthly subscription because they got to eat, they got to find accommodation, they got to pay for electricity, they need to pay for the utilities first before you listen to music. Right? So that would go back to the addressable market even more. And these were lessons that you just learned because you just assume that, there's this kind of like one size fits all. But I think over the years, and those were early days, you know, back in the day, we used to compete with Spinlet, you know, Congo were new then, Premiere were new then. That was really like the early contemporary tech scene was being developed around that time. It was like 2010, 2011. Right? I think we've come way further along now. You know, you guys at Paystack or Flutterwave, you know, and all the other tech companies can now, you know, take some of those learnings for the last decade and like fine tune their businesses. So, you know, Iroking, you know, and then on the music side, I think I learned early on that it's very hard to enforce IP in Nigeria. We're in the IP business, in music, in movies, in media, right? It's very hard to enforce IP. Which then obviously affects your valuation, right? Because you can have a really exciting business. You can sign a bunch of acts. You could be the hottest shit. So, sorry, excuse my French. You could be the hottest stuff. But, you know, there's so many different things that can affect your valuation, like you're trying to raise, right? And, you know, how you protect your IP in the long term is obviously something that's very important. And that's why you find out early on that it's easier for a platform to raise than it probably is for a label. Because a platform can work with it, right? Whether you have the right or you don't have the right, you're going to work with any and almost everybody. Whereas in the label, you need to have your IP, you know, 100%, because you know, if your contracts aren't enforceable, there's no value in your business. So I think learning that early on, you know, understanding the nuances of managing digital licensing, the digital licensing process in Nigeria, understanding the importance of relationships, of having fail-safes when contracts, when it becomes difficult to contracts, you need to have fail-safes in place. So, you know, I've learned a couple tricks over the years. And I guess that's probably why I'm probably still surviving in the IT business, just because of all the learnings I've had over the years. A lot of people have left since I've been in the music industry. A lot of people have started and run away. Like, and I get it. It's a thankless. It's a largely thankless job. But I still like seeing someone go from that stage of almost at nowhere to like superstar. You know, it's a great process to see. But yeah, I mean, shout out to all the music execs, you know, who've done their things for years. Yes, and the guys coming up tomorrow. You know, just know it's not an easy job, but it's rewarding to a certain extent, and you know, just use that as a building block for other things.
How do you navigate those challenges where when you've signed an artist and then they now start to renege on their contract? Let's say they have one hit song and then they now come back and say, hey, I think I want to be out of my contract. And we see a lot of those cases in the industry. What has been your approach to navigating those sort of situations?
I mean, you know, early on, like it probably would have been an issue because I think even though I was focused on digital, you still have this kind of like label mentality of, you know, multiple rights, right? And I think that's where things get messed up the most, especially for the labels and the management companies who are relying on, you know, ambassadorial deals, percentages, you know, live shows, touring, percentages. I got to a stage where everything I just thought about was digital. I just want the album. I just want a single rights. It's very easy for me to force those rights from a digital perspective. Much easier than physical. When you have to start chasing marketing Alaba, using your CDs, right? In the digital environment, the DMCA is like a DMCA is like a beautiful thing. I mean, you can attack content, you can take down content, you can actually get people to the negotiation table just using some of these tools in terms of, you know, allowing certain content to go out, taking down certain content, and enforcing your own IP, right? So I think that, for me, I grew accustomed to that because it was the only thing I could really protect outside of court. I've been to court. I've been through that whole rigmarole. I'm sure you've heard all the stories of Chocolate City taking this person to court. Kiss Daniel was taken to court. This person was taken to court. Bad Boy James recently was taken. All these different, all these things, right? And even when you go through that court process, it's a long-winded process. You could process 5 years, 10 years, right? I've had some cases that I've been on in court for 8 years, 9 years. I'm still in court on certain things 9 years later, right? It's crazy. But then you get to really say, okay, fine, like, this is not sustainable. I can't close down my business to pursue a court case. Where can I be strong? And that's for me why I put on digital IP. Like, if you don't want to work with me anymore, and artists, I've signed artists, I've helped them blow up, right? I've tested them early, put them on, and then it got big, and then they've said, all right, cool, I want to move on, give me my album.
My catalog.
Yo, we have a...
That's not how this works.
That's not how this works. It's a contract. Right? If you want to buy me out, right? This is how much you can buy me out. And I measure all of my buyouts now primarily in Bitcoin. Because to me, it's an opportunity. Right? Right? So I'm going to invested in your project, and you pay me what my opportunity costs a lot. It's very transparent to me. Right? And artists have complained and everything. I'll be like, look, yo, if you don't want to buy me out, I have rights over this project for X amount of years. And that's what the contract says. If you want to challenge that, no problem. And if we start to challenge it, that means we'll remove the album from the stores. And anyone who tries to upload your album, I'm going to remove it from the stores to have a right to, right? Nobody wants a situation where their content isn't available for consumption. So largely that's kind of like one of the ways that we have multiple ways we worked on this thing, but that's definitely one of the tools that we.
So what are your thoughts around how NFTs could revolutionize the industry?
It's still early, right? Like I'm in the weeds when it comes to NFTs, deep in the weeds. And this isn't just on a music basis, right? My interest in NFTs goes way beyond. It's just about decentralization. It's about crypto. It's about Web3, right? I don't put a music hat on and look at NFTs. What I see in the space is that a lot of us are obviously interested in how musicians and the music industry can utilize NFTs. I don't think anyone's perfect yet, right? I definitely think that artists, digital artists, crypto artists, they've got that right. Like, it was fortunate for them that NFTs has worked out really well for them. I think firstly, also, a lot of people need to understand that non-fungible tokens with the NFT aren't just for artists. It's not just about digital art. It's literally about a digital, right, on the ledger. Now, with regards to music, some of the early projects that I'm looking at, looking at things more from a utility perspective, like how do we add an NFT rollout as part of a, as part of a tool, as part of your suite of, offerings for your community. You're going to have your live show. You're going to have your merchandise, you're going to have your streaming products, and then potentially you're going to have like an NFT, right, of some sort. I think that the guys who understand it and get it well will use NFTs to basically empower themselves via their community. I think one of the potential cases is like, look, the major label, a lot of people have argued about major labels and the rights they take over the years. Like, I've gotten a bad deal, No one forced these guys to sign these deals. I'm in the systems. I know it's not all bad, right? Some deals are good, some deals are bad. It's the power of negotiation, right? Ultimately speaking, we're talking about the man, the corporate body that comes in and takes a portion of your earnings and almost acts like a bank, right? The I see major label as an investment bank. Now, using NFTs, artists, musicians may potentially be able to sidestep a major label as a bank and use their fan base as a bank. Right? So the fan base, who your true fan, who buy into whatever NFT project you bring out, right? They're doing it because of the love for you. They want to see your project out. They want to be part of that project. They want to have ownership in that project, right? So it's almost like that kind of like fundraiser tool. Like, let's say you release a project, 5,000 avatars. Let's say it's MI or something. He releases a project, 5,000 PFP avatars in the project, right? Everybody who buys into this NFT gets a stake in, so and so project, right? Like your NFT is almost like your share in that project, right? So the money he uses to raise from selling out his NFT, he now puts that back into his album project. He's going to make videos, he's going to pay for studio time, he's going to pay for marketing, promo, everything that traditional major label for. You've actually been able to raise selling an NFT, right? I think that's one way, and that's almost like crowdfunding in a way, right? On the Web3. I think it almost acts like a ticket in some ways. Well. I've seen guys use NFT as a ticket somewhere where it's not necessarily a ticket to the show, but it's like a ticket to be an exclusive member of a fan base. Like maybe you release an NFT, 100 NFTs that are almost like your Genesis token. It's like a super fan base. Maybe you're selling NFT for $10,000. And each NFT comes with the opportunity to meet you backstage on tour for life. You almost have a lifetime backstage access to me as an artist, right? A super fan is going to pay a lot of money for that. Yeah, there's a popular saying about 1,000 true fans. If you have 1,000 true fans, you actually don't need any more. Having millions and millions of fans, not everyone is going to consume everything put out there. So I think I'm going to see I believe artists will start to understand how to utilize NFTs to grow their communities. I think artists start to use NFTs to understand how to potentially raise finance, right? I think artists will use, NFTs in lots of potentially interesting ways that we haven't seen yet. So I get asked all the time, I want to drop this NFT, I want to do it like this. People are still trying to figure out. I think a CryptoPunk rapper called Spotty Wi-Fi, he understood community and he was speaking in the crypto community. So when he dropped his album, I think he sold out, generated about $300,000 or $400,000 in about an hour, right? Selling out. And he never made that kind of money before in his music career. Right? But what that money has now allowed him to do is allowed him to obviously go back to his artistry and take it to the next level without having to go to a big label. And probably the big labels will probably even ignore him anyway, but his fan base tapped in for him and supported him, right? And he's used his NFTs in an interesting way.
Yeah. So what does that bode for the future of the labels then? Because it seems like in this decentralized future that people are trying to cut out the intermediary, right? The middleman. So how would labels transition to that next stage? What are your thoughts on that?
I think, look, more and more and more, even when I was with Sony, I saw this, right? And even like representing Merlin, working with all the independent labels across the world, I see this. Labels are becoming more brands as well, right? Now, back in the day, the label was kind of like just that corporate machine. Now you're seeing labels turn into brands. You're seeing labels put on festivals. You're seeing labels going to merch. You're seeing labels actually become more in tune with their fan base. It's not just the artist fan base anymore. Certain people who love Ultra, they have Ultra Festival. Ultra's a label. Ultra has its own fans, right? Aside just the guys it signs, right? So I think that we're going to see more of that. We're going to see labels become content creators these days, right? So they're not leaving everything up to the artists anymore. And I think NFTs are probably going to expedite that. Labels have to become brands onto themselves as well, right? And then we'll potentially see more collaborative efforts. So it's not based on I'm signing you. It's based on we're going into this partnership. This is what I bring to the table. This is what you bring to the table, right? I still think that, labels still have that strength of being think tank behind an artist. Like it's all good artists saying that, okay, I want to connect more directly with my fans, doing direct fan. Some artists just want to create music. They don't want to get bogged down in the details of marketing campaigns and rollouts, 5-year strategies and raising
and community building, all of that.
They don't want to get in that. They want to get into it. They want to smoke weed. They want to go to the club. Some want to get involved in it, but I think it's not for everybody, right? And that's completely understandable, right? Everybody has role to play. I think that it's great for artists because the options improve. Because labels, I think where we are now, labels are going to have to up their game, right, and increase their offering. Do you understand? I think we're seeing that happen anyway, right? Labels aren't really labels anymore. We're seeing this hybridization of music companies. So now you're kind of like a distributor, label services, a label, a production company, a marketing company, a management company, and you're rolled into
do all.
Maybe you have
you do all
functions. You're seeing management companies distributing artists. You're seeing labels become management guys. You're seeing aggregators going to marketing and promo. So, there's this hybridization. It's like the whole NFT, decentralization, Web3, ethos is going to speed up this leveling of the playing field. That's ultimately what it is. The playing field is being leveled, where we're all creators, or we're interested in the concept creation. How do we come together to create and reach a fan base?
That is beautifully put. So, Michael, I think as we're rounding up, there's one question we always ask all our guests as they come onto the show. If the only thing left in the world was to read a book about your life, what would the title of the book be?
It was colorful.
Love it.
So, some context behind that. I feel that I've lived quite a colorful life so far. I'm married today, children, I'm definitely a family man. I run a business. I'm a mentor to some people. And I haven't always been like that. I think, I've done a lot in the last 10 years during my existence on this continent. I only moved to Nigeria for the first time in my life in 2009 or so. And I think that step alone was, stepping into the unknown. And between UK, entrepreneurial efforts in London, coming to Nigeria and basically traveling the world, from my professional to my personal life, I think it's been quite interesting. So if they're writing a book about it at the end of the day, I'd call it was colorful.
So can you tell us about 3 books or so that have had a profound impact in your life?
I think Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill, right? That's an old one, right? I think I was told to read that when I was younger, and it had a profound impact because it was, what I got out of the book was that it was about energy, right? It was literally about how do you assign and apportion energy. As a young man, you can either put energy into certain things like games or girls or something. As young men, you find something to put energy into. But I think the book was talking about, if you put your energy into thinking about how do you move forward with your life from a financial perspective, other things will come, right? Don't worry about the other stuff. Think about that. So it was really about, think and grow rich. So a lot of thinking. It was a pretty difficult book to read when I was younger, I won't lie. But I read it again when I was older, and I had new perspectives on it. I think another interesting book would be The Fiat Standard. The Bitcoin Standard, right? It's by Saif Dean, right? It's an excellent book. It helps you think about literally this concept that I think will happen called, Bitcoinization, right? Where I believe that Bitcoin will actually become a potential reserve currency or reserve asset used by governments and people, right? So the Bitcoin Standard teaches you a lot about fiat and the history of fiat currencies. And, one of the biggest issues in schools is that schools don't teach enough about personal finance and finance in general. And you find that, if you grow up wealthy, I didn't grow up wealthy, right? But you find that people who grow up wealthy have a different way of thinking about money and about how to generate money and about, and about debt and about assets, financial assets and savings and, productive assets and what have you. And I think that the Bitcoin Standard is a great book that's very educational about Bitcoin in and of itself, as well as the history of fiat currencies and issues and risks around that and centralized governments and trust and all of that. I think that's very interesting. I've read so many recently, but I think another very interesting book that I'm actually still on, I'd advise people to read, I'm almost done with it. It's called Snow Crash. Now, it's a book about the metaverse. And I think that's something that people really need to start understanding a lot better. Because it's the next thing, right? We've been in Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. We've been in the pseudo metaverse. People don't realize it, right? Communicating with people in on digital platforms more than on physical. Right? So on Twitter we have a character. IG we have a character. On Snapchat we have a character. We have ways of communicating and what we put out in the world. It's like your avatar, right? The metaverse and Web3 is just the next step of that, where you're now thinking about more things like augmented reality, virtual reality, skins, not just in-game skins. I think guys have seen like the Meta advert. I'm not down for the whole Facebook Meta, but I'm sure he gives people a good perspective of what that is. So the metaverse is coming, right? It's here actually, right? And it's a great book that gives some context around, the metaverse, what it is and what it could be, some of the dangers around it. So Snow Crash, I think those would be 3, but there's just so many amazing books out there right now that I've just been reading. Yeah.
I love it, man. So, Michael, one of the questions we ask as we round up the show is, what does being Afropolitan mean to you?
It means knowing who I am. It means, for me, I know a lot of people don't have the luxury of knowing their roots, but I know my roots. And that was what was super important for me moving back to Nigeria, moving to Nigeria, to understand, to know my father's forefathers, to go back to where it all started. And I think, being an Afropolitan for me is not just the fancy, the luxury, it's about DNA, right? It's about understanding our history, understanding that we have so much to offer, understanding that we are great people, understanding that the best hasn't always been written about us in history. However, we have a massively rich, storied history.
Definitely.
Right? And I think it's great people learn and understand. And I think the great thing about Afropolitan, because I've been with the Afropolitan team at Coachella, I've been at the events and everything, and I love the way it networks and brings people together. And I think for me, it's that connectedness, and not just the connectedness to other Afropolitans, but like I said, that being connected to my roots. So it's very, very DNA based for me.
Definitely. Michael, thank you so much, man. I think one of the reasons why we launched the Afropolitan Podcast is my thesis has always been podcasting is our new oral tradition as Africans. Like in the days we passed things down through oral, but today we now have the technology to really capture that audio and really retain it for the future audience, because the audience is not necessarily the audience of today, but the audience of the future. So thank you again for coming to the Afropolitan Podcast.
Glad to be here, man. Glad to be here, man.
Thank you for listening to the Afropolitan Podcast. We are building the future of a progressive Black community. To join our community, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Afropolitan. Be sure to join our Discord and Clubhouse community by clicking on the link tree on our Instagram page. See you on social.